Individualism is a key element of entrepreneurial mindset that we'll examine. We'll first define the term. We'll talk about its impact in relationship to the success of entrepreneurship. And we'll also provide a tool to help you assess your own level of individualism. When we define the term, individualism means that you need less support or approval from others. You may place a very high value on independence and freedom and control. There may be a willingness, even a preference, to go against the norm. And that high individualism is associated with an emphasis on individual initiative and need for achievement. Collectivism is the other side of that. As individuals, we focus on I. If you're more of a collectivist, you focus on the we. Individuals have their own goals. Collectivists have group goals. Individualists emphasize themselves. Collectivism, you look at the group emphasis. With individualism, the element of reciprocity or sharing is not required, may not even preferred, whereas with collectivism, it's expected. Individuals manage individuals. Collectivism is more about the management of the collective group. And when we look at this and we think about what does that mean in practice, or how is it related to entrepreneurship and decision making, we'll deconstruct and think about this at both the abstract and the concrete levels. At the individualism or individualistic perspective, it's tightly correlated with decision making based on achievement, based on risk taking. There's more assertiveness. There's more speed to action. Inversely, when we look at collectivism, there's a bit more sensitivity of the group. There's a bit more consideration of not so much that I have low confidence in my decision, in that I have higher confidence when I have developed the buy-in and the consensus of others. There's also a measure of security that's involved as well, of making a more safe decision. What that can mean is that with this collectivism mindset, decisions are a bit slower to come by. They're a bit more complex. You have more viewpoints, you have more individuals and perhaps other groups or organizations that play a role in the decision. You may even avoid some decisions or simply agree to disagree on some areas and may potentially come up with a suboptimum decision because you're trying to satisfy many different groups that may or may not have common interest. Individualism and collectivism historically were viewed as two very different things, and that people were in one bucket or they were in the other bucket. What we realized of late is that most people have a combination of both of these. What that means is that they may have a we identity and they are concerned about the group, but they may preface their individual goals to those of others. They may have a more of an individual emphasis in their decision making, but they still believe that reciprocity and sharing with the group is critical and valuable. And the management of groups is a priority as well. So here we see a blend of the orange elements from the collectivism and the lighter colored blue elements for the individual, and many of us fall somewhat in combination of the two rather than all one or all the other. As far as what contributes to this mindset, or what contributes to being one or the other, or what degree of both, national and/or ethnic cultures play a big role in this. So we look at the cultures, and largely company and national cultures, and their influence. And it often has a lot to do with how we perceive problems, of how we generate our alternatives, of how we select the alternative, and what our decision criteria are for that. The Columbia University recently did a study in collaboration with the Gallup poll in looking at, nationally, the happiest countries, the 40 happiest places on Earth. And you can see here what the relative rankings were, both on the graphic and on the table. And you see Denmark, Finland, Norway, the Netherlands, Canada as the top 5. Switzerland, Sweden, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, rounding out the top 10. Also note that 40 doesn't mean last in the world. It means 40th of approximately 200 countries. So what we see here is that what causes it? You could think wealth. Many of us would think perhaps you could correlate per capita GDP in dollars, the wealth of the nation, with happiness. But what we see when we look at the top 5, only one of them that ranks in the top 5 of happiness is also in the top 5 of wealth. We see 30s, we see 60s in wealth. We also can look at life expectancy. And we could think, well, perhaps happiness is related to the life expectancy. No real correlation here either. We see that the higher life expectancy countries, the Japan, the Singapore, the Hong Kong, are not in our top 10 happiest either. Well, perhaps it's safety. But it's not. So when we look at the rankings here regarding some of the safest places on Earth, few of them rank high in the happiness context. So when we think about, well, what could it be? We often see, and there's increasingly research to see, that it might be this element of individualism and collectivism, that the happiest places tend to think a little bit more along the lines of collectivism than those that are more individualism in nature. So in summary, when we think about individual and collectivism, they are impactful of your entrepreneurial success. Entrepreneurs tend to have a bit higher level of individualism, but too much of anything may be detrimental. And so we don't want to be absent of this collectivism aspect either. The orientation here too is to get you to think about and understand what are your innate preferences. And then from there, you'll be able to think about how you may expand and grow and build upon some of those weaknesses. And that's going to be the aspect that we'll look at collectively a little bit later in the term in some of our deliverables. But at this point, we wanted to introduce you to the concept, get you to do the self-evaluation, and begin to think about some of these issues of individualism and collectivism.